This week on Engage the Sage.
Hi everyone, I'm Don Saucier. Welcome to this week's episode of Engage the Sage. This week, I'm going to talk to you about how to achieve and sustain your teaching excellence. You and I both have a lot of responsibilities, both personal and professional. We have challenges, we have crises, we have things competing for our time. And sometimes that pursuit of teaching excellence becomes cumbersome. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you 10 recommendations about how to make that a little bit less cumbersome. So when you reach excellence in teaching, it's more likely you will replicate that excellence from semester to semester. My first recommendation for developing sustainable excellence in teaching is to have an excellent teaching philosophy. What I recommend is figuring out who you are as a teacher, thinking about the teaching persona that you want to adopt so your students know who you are as a teacher in your class, thinking about the philosophy that guides your understanding of teaching and learning with your students. I think that teaching philosophy that all of us should share to be excellent should be grounded in the idea of promoting our students' learning and success. We should be setting up our teaching philosophy so that we understand we're teaching people, not just content. And we're teaching holistic people who, like us, have a lot of things going on in their lives. We should be teaching inclusively, we should be infusing our classes with empathy, and we should be bringing peace to all of our classes. Peace, as I hope you know from my other videos, is preparation, expertise, authenticity, caring, and engagement. I recommend that you take some of these foundations for an excellent teaching philosophy and you make them your own. You find out how you want to uniquely bring those concepts of inclusivity, empathy, and peace into your classes to inspire your students' engagement and learning. When you have derived that teaching philosophy for yourself, that teaching philosophy will inspire your specific practices. Your teaching philosophy will help you develop a course structure, a set of course assignments, policies, ways of interacting with your students that are going to work to bring that philosophy to life for your students. And when you have figured that philosophy out and you have let it dictate your practices, what you can now do is use similar strategies across your classes. If your philosophy in multiple courses is the same, you might find there are some aspects of the structure and the policies, etc., that you can bring from one class to the next. My second recommendation for achieving and sustaining teaching excellence is to use your resources. It may feel like we are the first people to ever be presented with these challenges, but in reality, people have been teaching for a long time. So finding colleagues, finding professional network, looking for resources on social media, watching Engage the Sage videos, and lots of other ways to find information about teaching philosophies and practice can help you determine what you can take and use again and again to achieve and sustain your teaching excellence. My third recommendation for achieving and sustaining teaching excellence is to streamline your structure and streamline your content. In streamlining your class structure, what I'm going to ask you to think about doing is boiling down to the essence and creating a predictable routine and rhythm for your class over the semester so that you're not reinventing new innovative stuff every time. You're doing the same innovative stuff every time so that you and your students can focus on achieving that rather than refiguring out the class every week. A very specific recommendation I might want you to consider in streamlining your structure is to build your class on 1,000 points. If you build your class on 1,000 points, it's really easy to see how much everything is worth in terms of its percentage. And it's kind of a psychologically satisfying number for students to kind of strive toward versus, say, a random number like 568 total points. Reaching 900 to be the A is a really easy number to wrap people's head around. And this psychological comfort, I think, is meaningful. In streamlining your content, I want you to think clearly and intentionally about what it is you will teach. When I think about the content I am going to include in my class, I think about teaching what is important and necessary, and also what is personally relevant and interesting. If it meets one of those two criteria, it gets in. If it doesn't go in there. And one of the things that I want to try to do is to let my course breathe. And what I might even do is put in less content, but go into greater depth, something I call teaching less better. My fourth recommendation for achieving and sustaining teaching excellence is to focus and streamline your assessments. I want you to think about what is important that you assess and assess only that. I want those assessments to be fair, I want them to be direct, and I want them to be meaningful. I want your assessments to be things you're excited to receive from your students. I recommend you consider using more frequent lower stakes assessments rather than just have a couple higher stakes assessments that increase the anxiety for your students and increase the level of complexity for you. You may want to consider offering your assignments to batches of students at a time, especially if you have a large class. Maybe half of your students are going to do the assignment for this date, and the other half will do it for a later date. What this will do is to help you kind of think about getting that grading done in increments rather than getting slammed by all of the assignments at once. Remember that everything you assign will come back to you. So when your students are overwhelmed by all the stuff you're assigning to them at the end of the semester, you're about to be overwhelmed too. So anything you can do in your course planning to avoid that is going to make it easier to achieve and sustain your teaching excellence. My fifth recommendation for achieving and sustaining teaching excellence is to get the maximum from your students. What I mean when I say this is shorten the assessments. So we've done a video on this, but just in summary, when you're giving an assignment, I highly recommend, rather than giving a minimum number of pages, I would give a maximum number of pages, or words or minutes for a presentation or something like that. And I usually make it less than I think they need, so I get their second draft. Their first time through on that paper or that presentation is going to be too long. They've got to cut it down to the essence, and they've got to make it better. And that's what I then get to process. My sixth recommendations for your achieving and sustaining teaching excellence is to use personalized assessments. When you give your students some choice and some ability to infuse their assignments with their own experiences, their own take on the information, these are going to be so much more interesting for you. You're not going to be reading the same assignment 50 or 100 times. It's going to be harder for them to cheat. It'll provide examples that you have now crowdsourced for using in subsequent semesters of your class, so that sustaining your teaching excellence is going to be driven by the input of your students. And best, it deepens the learning of your students. So rather than just having them regurgitate your course material, what they're doing is they're applying it in meaningful ways. My seventh recommendation for achieving and sustaining your teaching excellence is to infuse empathy in your course however you can. I want you to apply that empathetic course design perspective that we've talked a lot about. I want you to put empathy on your syllabus. I want you to put it in your syllabus statements. I want you to put it into your course policies. I want your course structure to reflect empathy. I want your course assignments to be empathetic. When you do that and you're striving to be supportive and to build community, what you're creating is a fulfilling experience for both you and your students that you're going to want to replicate. My eighth recommendation for achieving and sustaining teaching excellence is to invite student feedback, but to use that feedback as informative for your course decisions. We sometimes have the tendency to overreact to student feedback. If one student tells us there's something in our class they wish were different, sometimes we feel obligated to do that. We're not obligated to make a course change based on one student's feedback, but we should consider what that feedback is. And if that feedback is going to help us bring our teaching philosophy to our practices in that class in a way that's going to work for us, we should consider that. So use that feedback as informative, but don't keep yourself beholden to address every single specific point that someone tells you about your class. My ninth recommendation for achieving and sustaining teaching excellence is related to the last one, and this means that you should tweak your classes from semester to semester. What I mean by tweaks is making small, subtle adjustments based on the information that you have. So your experience with the assignments, your students' experience that they told you about in the feedback, use those to make small changes in your class moving forward to make improvements that are consistent with your teaching philosophy. I do not recommend overhauling your class because generally, overhauling your class means you're changing everything at once. You can't then tell what changes were good and bad. And put my research hat on for a second, that's poor programmatic research design to change all of the variables and try to identify what variables had an effect. I also think tweaks are much more sustainable semester to semester than overhauling is, which takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and doesn't necessarily increase the quality of the experience for you or your students. My 10th recommendation for achieving and sustaining your teaching excellence is to focus on maximizing the experience for you as the instructor. I think if I had to pick one key for achieving and sustaining teaching excellence is to make sure the teaching experience is fulfilling for you. When the teaching experience is fulfilling for you and you are engaged, this is the whole premise of my trickle-down engagement idea. When you are engaged, when you are fulfilled, when you are validated, when you're loving it, they are more likely to be engaged too and come along for that educational ride with you. And when they do, they are more likely to learn successfully. So when you make it about your experience and maximizing that experience, it's probably going to be better for them and they're going to learn better. When it's good for you, when it's good for them, you're more likely to want to replicate that experience semester to semester. What I've shared with you are 10 ways that I think you can help achieve and sustain your teaching excellence from semester to semester to make the classes better for you and for your students. In the comments below, I would love to hear your ideas about how to achieve and sustain teaching excellence. Thank you for watching this episode of Engage the Sage. Please like, subscribe, sign up for notifications, share us on social media, and we'll see you next time on Engage the Sage.